Yay, finally, we're going live. Okay, I got to update the link. So, what question from this particular set of problems would you guys like to discuss first, if you had one in mind? Give you an opportunity to think about it. Go for it. 14. Take a peek at number 14 real quick. Excellent. 24% of people contracted the disease. Okay, not that that's an excellent statement to make, but did you attempt to fix it? What did you do? The simulation? Why is that? Or why would you prefer to do it like that? If only there was a very not scientific way, but unscientific way of kind of putting it. Do you know what do I typically say in terms of the conclusions that you guys have to do? Do you remember? Ooh. I usually say something to the effect of, I don't want you making definitive statements. I don't want you making definitive conclusions. I don't want you taking hard stances. 24%. Wait, what did they say exactly? 24% right there of the people contracted the disease. Instead, I say you should use fluffy language. Should be fluffy.
So it's like 24% of people may catch the disease.
Something like that. He said, like, based on the simulation. Yes, that's also another good way of putting it. Based on the simulation, taking the responsibility off of yourself, basically saying, I came to this conclusion based on the simulation that I conducted. Now, here's all that information. You're not taking the definitive stance. You're basically saying, well, based on that simulation, which is not my definitive stance, 24% of people contracted the disease. You know, or it appears that 24% of people would contract the disease based on the simulation. Again, taking that fluffy language, taking that responsibility off yourself. There is evidence to suggest that 24%. Now, that's an amazing, amazing statement right there. I'm just making sure the live stream works. It works. Cool. Let's get rid of that. Let's go over here. Good. There is evidence to suggest is another amazing statement. Oh, cool. I got two people. I do apologize for the two people who were in the chat, or three people now. I had technical difficulties with the live stream, but clearly I was able to fix it since there are three people in here, you know? Hopefully it's not just like three people who will have nothing to do with AP Stat and just Google searched it and are now just hanging out really creepily. They do that. Anyway. Yeah, evidence to suggest something along those lines. Take that responsibility off of yourself. If you can make a definitive statement like 24% of the people contracted the disease, ooh, yeah, AP grader is going to mark that down. Going to mark that wrong. You know how they grade the AP test? Half and half, it's like multiple choice, which runs through a machine. And the other half is free response, which is graded by a human being. These despicable human beings get together for a week in St. Louis. And they go through every single question that was written for the AP test in a giant room. They compare answers. They laugh at answers, you know, blah, 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 blah. They're very terrible. But then if you change one word, or if you misuse a phrase, or if you don't definitively say one type of thing, but then make a statement like 24% of the people will contract the disease, they will laugh and laugh and laugh and then mark it down. They are terrible human beings. I want to be one of them. They take AP teachers from across the country to grade them. It's great. I would get paid for a week to go grade an AP test and be a nerd. Oh, that'd be amazing. What else you guys got? What other questions would you like to talk about? Because like I said, I do have one or two of my own that I'd like to talk about. Hi there in the chat. Okay. How'd you guys feel about number 20? Yeah. Let me flip over to number 20. I believe it was the next page. Click. There it is. Lucky guessing. A friend of yours who has took the multiple choice quiz in exercise 19, don't worry about that, got all 6 questions right, but now claims to have guessed blindly on every question. If each question offered 4 possible answers. Do you believe her? Now, I'm going to stop there for a moment. Each question had 4 possible answers, so you have a percent chance of what? 25%. You have a 25% chance of getting each question right. This, your friend claims to have blindly guessed, which means that they, by accident, got every single question right, 25% chance each of the way. Now, we will eventually get into probability. We will eventually figure out the chance of such an event happening. But that is not what this question is asking you to do. They're asking, do you believe her? But more specifically, explain basing your argument on a simulation involving at least 10 trials. If we are going to run a simulation, there are several things that we got to do. First of all, you could use a random number table, or you could use rand_int 1, 4. Rand_int 1, 4 can be very helpful. There we go. Rand_int 1, 4 is what I would like to end up using on the computer. I'm going to show you on my calculator in a little bit. I'm going to have to seed the calculator because, well, if you open up your calculator on your Chromebook, it's going to automatically be reset. And that's not really going to be helpful because you're going to get the same answers as everyone else. So I'm going to do rand_int 1, 4. That's the random function I'm going to use. Next, I'm going to have to assign numbers. I'm going to say, now, by the way, this is not the only way to do it. This is not the only way to do it. There are a ton of different ways you could do this thing. You could let 1 be correct. You could let 2 to 4 be wrong. There's my assignment of numbers. I'm going to need a stopping point for the trial. Well, very easily, the trial ends with 6 questions. Once you get to 6 questions, that's the end of one trial, and they want you to run at least 10 trials. Okay? I need a response variable. What should my response variable be if I had to put that into words? I'm trying to simulate something in order to determine if my friend is telling the truth. My friend claims to have gotten all 6 correct. There's a couple different ways you could identify the response variable here. But what's one way you could do it?
Let's say 4 answers given until you get the correct answer.
So wait, say that one more time.
4 answers given until you get the correct answer.
But I got to run I got to run 6 questions though. There's a chance that if I run 6 questions for a trial, I'd get none correct. You know what I'm saying?
It's like, since you can't change the amount of questions that you run, it has to depend on all of them being correct. So, running 6 trials, of, not 6 trials, 6 questions and having all of them be wrong.
Mm-hmm. I gotcha. There are 2 ways to kind of do the response variable. One of them is what you just described. One way you could do the response variable is just basically, well, if you get all 6 correct, let's consider that a success. And if you don't get all 6 correct, let's mark that down as a failure or something like that, or a win and a loss. Another way you could just do it is you just count the number of correct responses. This is probably the easier way to do it. This markers. Ugh, hold on. Be jealous of my skills. There we go. The response variable is the number of correct responses. Think about how a simulation is supposed to be run. Simulation is supposed to be run with some kind of random tool. There's a number assignment. You have to identify a stopping point. You have to identify a response variable. And then typically you have to come to a conclusion. Now, with that conclusion, you do involve an average. And I'm kind of thinking ahead for this. If I were to just have a response variable as the number of correct responses, I could average all those numbers together across my trials. And I could say, well, the average number of correct responses was this compared to my friends saying that they got all 6 correct by blindly guessing. And then I can come up with a suitable conclusion. Let's see what happens. Boom. Boom. Okay. Check this out. I'm going to use today's date. Today's the 24th. Anyone remember how I store that? How I seed that in my calculator? Remember? Stow button. STO. STO is right down there. STO. Store that. Do you remember where I store it? Rand. Math. Perb. Rand. Enter. Haha. It's seeded, which means that if I go back to perb and I do rand int 1 comma 4 on your calculators on your Chromebooks, I believe it just comes up with some kind of interface where it says what lower limit, upper limit. Yeah. Same concept, same exact concept, lower limit, upper limit. And then you kind of run it from there. So I'm going to quickly run 6 questions. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many questions did I get correct? 0, a big old 0. So hold on, where's my marker? Hold on. A big old 0. I got to run 10 trials. Could you do me a favor? Could you stand over there by that calculator? And you got to do a couple things. Number 1, first we're just going to hit clear just to clear the screen. You just got to hit enter 6 times and then give me a moment. Go ahead. That was pretty close, but you didn't do it. But that was 5 correct responses. All right, clear the screen. Do it again. What in the? What are you? Question. If there's a 25% chance, what is 6 times 0.25? What is 6 times 0.25? Huh? 15? Yeah. On average, you should get about 1.5, according to what we call expected value, but that's a future lesson. All right, clear it. Do it again. Quickly. Let's see. Okay, 2, do it again. 3, do it again. 1, do it again. 2, do it again. 3, do it again. 0, do it again. Last time. 3, there we go. There's 10 trials. They said at least 10 trials. Nailed it. So we've run the 10 trials. We have to come up with a suitable conclusion. So the suitable conclusion that I'm going to do here, I'm going to average them all together, and I got about 2.3. So suitable conclusion. Or better yet, going back to the original question. The original question, do you believe your friend? Explain, basing your argument on a simulation involving at least 10 trials. Well, based on my simulation of 10 trials, I found an average of 2.3? 2.3 correct questions by blindly guessing. Now again, fluffy language. One of 2 ways of doing this. It seems unlikely that my friend would have gotten 6 correct answers by blindly guessing. Am I calling my friend a liar? No. There is evidence to suggest that my friend is not telling the truth about blindly guessing and getting all 6 correct. That's just another way of putting it. I'm not calling my friend a liar. I could say there's evidence to suggest my friend's a liar, but I'm not calling them a liar. In statistics, you cannot just flat out call them a liar. Even if you have all the evidence in the world, you cannot just flat out say, you're a liar. No. Based on the simulation, based on the evidence that we've collected, based on the average of 10 trials, I have evidence to suggest that my friend is not telling the truth. That's the best that you can potentially do in terms of a conclusion. Yay. I love it. Any other questions from this particular homework? Because actually, believe it or not, those were the 2 questions I would have gone over. Okay. Now again, Obviously, if you've already submitted this to Google Classroom, yay, happy day, cool, 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 cool. Again, the point of this is to get you familiar with these questions, to get you ready for what is to come down the road. On Google Classroom yesterday, I spent some time putting together some assignments for you, some very straightforward and easy, some that I definitely want to make sure you take your time with. Classwork, chapow. First and foremost, there is a quizzes minor. I believe you should have yesterday received at some point some kind of thing to like join the quizzes thing. Yeah, I basically just imported the Google Classroom. That's all it did. It imported the Google Classroom. Then, by the way, that is due Tuesday the 29th, of course. It's very easy. It's very straightforward. Did anybody read the instructions? How many chances do I give you? Yeah, I give you 2 chances. I got an 85 the first time. I wish I could do it again. Well, guess what? You can. Giving you 2 chances. Then, there's this free response on samples. Now, this free response, now, as you can see in the directions, typically, I would give you guys like something like 20 minutes for this, but obviously you have pretty much all weekend to get this done. Now, I'm not expecting a soliloquy. Think about what you can get done in like 15 to 20 minutes. Think about what you can get done in 15 to 20 minutes. Not that you would write out like page and page and page and page and page. Sometimes the answers are very, very simple. This question is actually from a past AP statistics test. It was used within the last decade on the AP test. I want to see what you can do with it. That's wonderful. They tell me, no, Mr. Markey, don't, copy AP questions. You can get in legal trouble for that. Whatever. Nobody knows. I'm not making money off this. I'm trying to make you better. So take your time with that. Yeah. Tomorrow, Friday, I will be live streaming on Google Meet. If you do have any clarification questions, please, by all means, stop in that Google Meet, and I will be there to answer said questions. I will be able to sit at my desk and have this Elmo camera set up. So if I need to write anything out for you, we can talk about that, and we'll go from there. So please make sure you're on top of that. All right. Let's talk about the 2016 election. You should have seen me on election night, which, by the way, this election night, you might actually see me because I'm going to live stream. Not from my school account, though. But you should have seen me on election night. On election night, I was on fire. I had a whiteboard set up in my living room. I had all the states laid out. I had all my predictions ready to go. Everything was phenomenal. There are 50 states plus Washington, D.C. 50 states plus Washington, D.C. I got 48 correct. 48. But I didn't get the election correct. I didn't get the election correct because there were 3 states that I got wrong. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Now, I want to talk specifically about Wisconsin because in Wisconsin, you can clearly see what is going on here. Here are the predictions. The election was November 9th. These predictions were literally within the week before November 9th. And you can see what they're predicting about Wisconsin. They're saying likely, lean, Democrat. Everyone and their mother was predicting that Wisconsin was going to go Democratic. Now, what's interesting is you guys don't know me very well, but I can be a bit neurotic about numbers and the amount of research that I do because I'm ridiculous. There we go. This is my 2020. Part of my research into the 2020 election and the predictions that I'm planning on making. Here is Wisconsin. If you look at that row right there, you can see in 2016 it went Republican. But before 2016, you can see exactly what Wisconsin did every election prior to that. In 80 and 84, that was a little bit of an anomaly. Actually, 72 was too. 72 was almost a perfect sweep by Nixon. 84 was almost a perfect sweep by Reagan. So it's unlikely that Wisconsin would go Democrat, but it did. Everyone was predicting it would go Democratic in 2016. And if you click here and look at the statewide polling Here is the polling, the sampling leading up to the election. This relates to exactly what we're going to be talking about today. These aren't like done in like March and April. These were done in the weeks leading up to the election. Here's a poll that had Clinton up by 7. Here's a poll that had Clinton up by 2. Here's a poll that had her up by 12, by 4, by 2. Trump won the state by less than 1%. Less than 1%. I asked you in that discussion question, well, what happened? What happened? Were the polls wrong? Were the polls flawed? No, they were not flawed. The polls were collected in the proper way. The methodology behind the collection of the polls were perfectly fine. There was nothing wrong with them. But why were they so wrong? Every poll leaning in one direction and then on election night went the other way. People are always baffled by this. People are like, oh, it's because, blah, blah, blah. She didn't visit the Rust Belt. Oh, it's because there was this secret voters that were all angry. Oh, it's because it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that. Nope. The polling was correct. Today's world is not set up for the way that polling needs to be done. How is polling done? How do people typically, they phone call? 20 years ago, you guys don't remember 20 years ago, we didn't have such a thing as caller ID. When somebody called your house, you didn't know what number it was. When somebody called your house, guess what you did? You picked up the phone because you didn't know who it was. Answering machines were just becoming a thing in the mid-90s. So you could screen your calls by just letting it go to the voicemail, or it was literally a physical tape. But when people called your house, you typically picked up the phone because there was nothing programmed. You didn't know whose number was what. But today, you know exactly who's calling you. Oh, I'm getting an unknown call from somebody in Arizona. No, thank you. Oh, well, that can't be good. Now, I'm going to give you some round numbers. Round numbers. The numbers that I'm about to show you are made up. I'm going to be very clear about that. The numbers that I want to show you are made up. But the numbers that I want to show you right now are to exemplify a point that is going to transition us into the video and the notes that I have for later on. Let's say that I'm a pollster in Wisconsin, and I know that I want to poll roughly 1,000 people. So I poll 1,500. You always poll way more than you need because you know that there's going to be a ton of people to say, no, thank you. I don't want to participate in your poll. Okay, cool. So only 1,000 respond. Only 1,000 actually want to partake in my poll. Okay, that's good. 1,000 said, yes, I will partake in your poll. And of that 1,000 who partook in my poll, 600 of them said, yes, I'm going to be voting for Clinton. And 400 of them said, yes, I am going to be voting for Trump. So as the responsible statistician that I am, I have to report the results that I have. I present my methodology. I showed them how I went about doing things. I showed them the randomization process. I showed them the exact wording of the questions and everything in between. Everything that I did, is that ever reported on the news? Do you ever hear about the methodology? Do you ever hear about no, not really. The news channel doesn't care about any of that stuff. What they care about is, just in a recent poll has Clinton up 60-40 in Wisconsin. She's up by 20 points in the weeks leading up to the election. Looks like she's got Wisconsin all wrapped up. That's all you hear. That's all you hear. But what about those 500 people who said, no, thank you, I don't want to participate in your poll? Of those 500 people who said, no, thank you, I don't want to participate in your poll, 400 of them went on to vote for Trump, and 100 of them went on to vote for Clinton. And then election night rolls around, and Trump wins Wisconsin by less than 1%, and all of a sudden, everyone loses their crap. Oh, clearly it was this. Oh, clearly it was that. When you are a statistician, your job is to remove, to the best of your ability, bias. Your job is to remove bias and your own preconceived notions. When you come into a statistician's world, you are to be cold and you are to leave your opinions at the door. Because what ends up happening in this situation is a form of bias that you can't do anything about. It's called non-response bias. Non-response bias. There is always going to be a number of people who don't want to participate in your poll. They're just going to say, no, thank you. I don't trust you. I don't trust you with my opinion. Go away. Hang up. Non-response bias. And your hope is that the people who don't respond, the people who are non-responders, you're hoping that their opinion is similar to that of those who did respond. But there are certain instances in which they're not. How do you avoid non-response bias? Well, there's a number of ways that you can attempt to do it, but in reality, you can't get rid of all of it. In a nutshell, that's what happened in Wisconsin. That's kind of what happened in Wisconsin. Oh, it's nuts. You ready for something scary? If I go out and in 2020 and I say I need to go collect a poll of information, and let's say I go to Wisconsin. Not Wisconsin, North Carolina. Right here, this is a recent poll in North Carolina. You can see I highlighted right there. It's from the beginning of September. And the only thing that's reported are the numbers. But if you click on the actual poll, typically they have some kind of report showing you their methodology and how they went about collecting the data. So I picked this random place and I picked this report and I kind of scrolled through and I decided to look for some important information. And ultimately what I found was this. What does that mean? Heck yeah. That should be terrifying to you. That should be terrifying to you. 2%. They got 1,046 respondents. You know how many people they asked? They asked over 50,000 people. 50,000. And only 1,000 responded. That should be terrifying to you. Because, ladies and gentlemen, when you see a poll on the news, I don't care what TV channel it is. I don't care what website it is. If you see a poll in today's day and age, a legitimate poll like this, the only people who are responding are the people to the far extremes of the left and the right. The people who I would say, I don't want to say like normal people, but like normal people are going to be like, yeah, I got better things to do. Click. The people who respond to polls are the ones who feel the strongest about what they feel. And their opinions, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you fall on, their opinions are the ones that are being reported. 20 years ago, that wasn't the fact. 20 years ago, people picked up their phones. Today, I don't even pick up the phone sometimes for my mom. I'm just saying. What do we do? Now, I don't have an answer for you. I'm just going to be very clear right now. When I ask you the question, what do we do? I don't have an answer. Mr. Markey, make a website. No, websites can be hacked. Not to mention people can change their IP address and vote like 50,000 times. They've done it. Okay, cool. Send text messages. It's just like, yeah, you can send text messages, but you're going to be missing out on a large population. People who don't really know how to handle phones. My mom is in her 70s. You really think that she knows how to respond to a text message with the proper wording? She barely responds to my text messages properly. It's got all sorts of typos in it. What do we do? I don't have an answer for you. This is more of a rhetorical question. It's a rhetorical question because I don't have an answer. The best thing that we can do is unfortunately continue doing what we're doing until we find something better. I actually had a thought. I had a thought like, okay, what if polling companies got together with phone companies and figured out a way where when the phone call is sent out, it'll say the number, but then underneath of it, it'll say like pollster or some junk like that. And then you would know, oh, it's a pollster. Maybe I want to participate in a poll or some junk like that. And then you'd pick it up, But more often than not, we just completely ignore unknown numbers because we think they're spam. We think they're people trying to sell us stuff. You ever get those phone calls where it's just like, we just found that there was an error on your credit card. We owe you $500. Please call us and give us this information. I've gotten those phone calls. Screw them. It's a different world we're living in now compared to 20 years ago. I'm just saying. Because in order to get accurate data, it is next to impossible. But people will still be polling. People will still be collecting data. People will still be analyzing. It is going to be your responsibility in the future. When I say yours, I mean like, when I say yours, I'm talking about like the future statisticians of this world. It'll be your responsibility to figure out how to do this better. Anyway, let me show you this video. I love the title. Immediately, I go from that to this title. Anyway.
Statistics are persuasive, so much so that people, organizations, and whole countries base some of their most important decisions on organized data. But there's a problem with that. Any set of statistics might have something lurking inside it, something that can turn the results completely upside down. For example, imagine you need to choose between two hospitals for an elderly relative's surgery. Out of each hospital's last 1,000 patients, 900 survived at Hospital A, while only 800 survived at Hospital B. So it looks like Hospital A is the better choice. But before you make your decision, remember that not all patients arrive at the hospital with the same level of health. And if we divide each hospital's last 1,000 patients into those who arrived in good health and those who arrived in poor health, the picture starts to look very different. Hospital A had only 100 patients who arrived in poor health, of which 30 survived. But Hospital B had 400, and they were able to save 210. So Hospital B is the better choice for patients who arrive at hospital in poor health, with a survival rate of 52.5%. And what if your relative's health is good when she arrives at the hospital? Strangely enough, Hospital B is still the better choice, with a survival rate of over 98%. So how can Hospital A have a better overall survival rate if Hospital B has better survival rates for patients in each of the two groups? What we've stumbled upon is a case of Simpson's paradox, where the same set of data can appear to show opposite trends depending on how it's grouped. This often occurs when aggregated data hides a conditional variable, sometimes known as a lurking variable, which is a hidden additional factor that significantly influences results. Here, the hidden factor is the relative proportion of patients who arrive in good or poor health. Simpson's paradox isn't just a hypothetical scenario. It pops up from time to time in the real world, sometimes in important contexts. One study in the UK appeared to show that smokers had a higher survival rate than non-smokers over a 20-year time period. That is, until dividing the participants by age group showed that the non-smokers were significantly older on average, and thus more likely to die during the trial period, precisely because they were living longer in general. Here, the age groups are the lurking variable and are vital to correctly interpret the data. In another example, an analysis of Florida's death penalty cases seemed to reveal no racial disparity in sentencing between Black and white defendants convicted of murder. But dividing the cases by the race of the victim told a different story. In either situation, Black defendants were more likely to be sentenced to death. The slightly higher overall sentencing rate for white defendants was due to the fact that cases with white victims were more likely to elicit a death sentence than cases where the victim was Black, and most murders occurred between people of the same race. So how do we avoid falling for the paradox? Unfortunately, there is no one-size-fits-all answer. Data can be grouped and divided in any number of ways, and overall numbers may sometimes give a more accurate picture than data divided into misleading or arbitrary categories. All we can do is carefully study the actual situations the statistics describe and consider whether lurking variables may be present. Otherwise, we leave ourselves vulnerable to those who would use data to manipulate others and promote their own agendas.
That last line, I'm going to replay that last line one more time.
May be present. Otherwise, we leave ourselves vulnerable to those who would use data to manipulate others and promote their own agendas.
There are companies out there that will pay big money for a statistician to come in and to run the numbers and to make the numbers look good, to make the numbers look favorable upon the company. And you can make, honestly, some big money. You could be making six figures with stock options if you were willing to do that kind of stuff. My hope is that you wouldn't, because a lot of the time you have to manipulate the data to fit what the company wants and not what the data actually says. But that's your choice. Statistics is much more versatile than any other mathematics you will ever take. Let me give you a silly example. This is actually a true story. Did I ever tell you about the village in Europe? No? Cool. This is a real story. There was a village in Europe in the 1700s. And one day people looked around and they noticed, there seemed to be a lot more storks making their nests in town. Like it was visibly noticeable. Like just almost these roofs had storks like nests in them. And they're like, what is going on here? Oh, well, I guess it's nothing. What happened less than a year later? The baby population exploded. They had a ton of babies being born. Not the storks, human beings. So what conclusion can you come to? Storks bring babies, right? Case closed. Cool. Clearly, that's not the case. So what happened? They found a direct correlation between the number of storks increasing and the number of babies being born. Direct correlation. It was mathematically proven. It was very strong. What's going on? Well, what happened was, in that particular village, there was an influx of young married couples. And they built their homes. And when they built their homes in this village, the new style of home had a particular shape of chimney. And that shape of chimney was sought after by these storks because they were able to make their nests in such a way where they could stay warm. But when you have young married couples getting together, what do they typically do? They produce. So the lurking variable in that case was the young couples. The fact that they were building these homes that brought in the storks, and they were young couples and they were making babies. Same argument was made by, not the exact same argument, but a similar argument about correlation was made by cigarette companies. They're like, listen, correlation, just because two things correlate, does not mean that one caused the other. Is it fair to say that the longer the number of years a person smokes, the more likely it is that they're going to get lung cancer? Isn't that fair? Yeah, that's fair. Absolutely. Back in the 1960s, cigarette companies were able to successfully argue cigarettes didn't cause the cancer. It was just simply correlated to the cancer. Now, that is a true statement. Correlation does not mean causation. The only way that you prove cause is with a well-designed experiment or a long-term observational study. But you can't force people to smoke for 20 years and then see what happens. That would be unethical. So they had to wait until the data came in. Now, today, it's common knowledge. Yes, cigarettes eventually, long-term cigarette use leads to cancer. That's common. We know that now. But back in the 1960s, they were able to successfully argue against it, which is why it took so long for them to get like the warning things on them. I don't know. You guys ever watch Mad Men? No? If you watch Mad Men, Mad Men is a TV show set in the 1960s about an advertising firm, and everybody is smoking in every scene. Everybody. My wife has a picture of herself when she was a baby, and her mom is holding her, my mother-in-law is holding her, and her mother-in-law has a cigarette in the other hand. It's just what people did back then. Today, clearly we know better, but back then, there's a lot of misinformation being rolled around. And it's because people are able, if people know how to manipulate the statistics in such a way where it's like, listen, here's the statistics, here's the truth behind it, but they're presenting it in such a way to make it more advantageous to them. Ah, it's so amazing. You have power. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to need from you, if you do not already have them out, which I know a lot of you already do, I'm going to need those notebooks out and open. There's some information that you read about in chapter 11 that I would like to go into more detail about. My desk is wet now. That's weird. There. Zooming out there. Japan. There we go. Bring this back here. Good. This is just chapter 11 continued. Chapter 11 samples continued. This is just a continuation of the notes that you started last week. Hopefully, if you watched the live stream video, which if you didn't, it's still there. But I wanted to finish up the notes on samples and then kind of give you a lead in to what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks. First of all, there is such a thing as a multi-stage survey. Multi-stage is pretty self-explanatory. Multi-stage, multiple stages, you know. A survey that has multiple steps and possibly different types of sampling. Quite literally, you could, last week, when you hopefully watched that video, you guys, in that video, I talked about what simple random sample, cluster sample, stratified sample. Maybe, yeah. Talked about a Boston cream donut. There you go. See? So you did that information was all in that video, but I'm just saying that if you wanted to do a multi-stage sample, you'd be like, okay, well, the first part of it is simple random. We're going to simple random. We're going to simply randomly select from, let's say, the Barnegat High School population. We're going to get an alphabetical listing. We're going to simply randomly select 200 people from the Barnegat Township population. And now that we have the 200, now we are going to split them up using a different type of sampling. Maybe we'll split up the 200 into clusters. Maybe we'll split up the 200 randomly, or maybe we'll split them up into strata and then randomly select each from each strata. If there's multiple steps to the random selection, then that is a multi-stage survey, something along those lines. Or, you know, maybe you randomly selected every fifth person walking into the building today. That would be systematic. And then after you have all those people, every fifth person, then maybe you split them up into strata, or maybe you do a simple random sample of those people. It really depends. A lot of the context will help with that. Then there is something called a sampling frame. A sampling frame is simply a list from which the sample is drawn. I just mentioned getting an alphabetical listing of Barnegat High School. And if I did that, that would be my sampling frame. The list is the population of interest. I'm abbreviating population. Oh, can't see it. There we go. The list is the population of interest. So it really does depend. I could look at my own roster. I could look at my own, all the students that are assigned to my classes during this particular school year, and I could randomly select from that, and then my sampling frame would just be Mr. Markey students. It would just be, that would be the list of the population of interest. Let's talk about the beginnings of bias. Your job as a statistician, as I said before, is to eliminate bias. Now, unfortunately, you can't eliminate all bias. Sometimes it's difficult to eliminate your own bias, but you need to do it. Now, first of all, as we're talking about bias, I need to talk about something called sampling error. Also known as variability. Variability. Good, I spelled it right. Good for me. So for example, hey. So for example, you flip a coin 100 times. How many times would you expect to get tails? 50. You would expect 50. Absolutely. You would expect 50. Now, if I flip that 100 times and I get like 5149, I get 5149. Am I wrong? No, I'm not wrong. Oh, there are more people. Hey. It's very intimidating. Goodness. I don't even know what's...
Your microphone.
Oh, yes. It's fantastic. It's Rock Band.
Letting them work much, they can hear much clearer.
Yes, they can hear much more clear using this.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. You guys can, right? Yeah, I'm just... It's all good. I don't even know what to call that. That's not even a photo bomb. He just kind of came in my camera. For using the chat, I apologize. You should only be looking at my beautiful face. Anyway, back to me. So, I flipped the coin 100 times. I get 5149. I didn't get 50-50. But I'm not wrong. I could do it again, and I could get... Come on, you. I could do it again, and I get 48-52. Am I wrong? No. I could even get 60-40. You're like, well, that's a bit farther off, but you're still not wrong. Now, theoretically, is it possible that I could get like 75-25? But is that likely? No, that's not likely. It's not likely, but that could happen. It could happen. And there's a % chance of the time that we can determine when that thing actually happens. It's phenomenal. But this is what I'm talking about in terms of the variability. Maybe one time I get 50-50. I have no idea. Maybe I would get 50-50. But that variability from time to time, that's what happens. So let's pretend for just a moment that there is an election coming up. I don't know. And let's say that people are looking at the favorability rating of, I don't know, somebody named Joe Biden. Who, I don't know. And let's say right now, the average of Joe Biden's favorability rating is like 50-50. Let's just say it's 50-50. I go out and I conduct a poll. My poll comes back, he's got a 51% favorability rating. I'm not wrong. Next poll comes back, he has a 48% favorability rating. Next poll comes back, it's a 60% favorability rating. These polls are not wrong. These are just simply the natural variation between what actually is and the sample that I have collected. Those numbers are the sample. Do you guys remember the terminology for what actually is? Like, if I take a sample and I get 51-48, that's not, or 49, that's not actually Joe Biden's favorability. That's just the sample statistic that I've collected. But the truth would be this other term, not the sample statistic, but the what? I know, it's been a week. Population parameter. The population parameter is actually what is. But unfortunately, it's difficult to know what the population parameter is unless you know every single person's opinion. So, sampling error is the difference between a population parameter and a sample statistic. The sample statistic is honestly like a shot in the dark. It's kind of a shot in the dark. It's like, I kind of hope I get this. The population parameter is actually what is happening. And that's really interesting because the biggest thing that you know coming up is the election. I'm trying to figure out how to properly word this. The biggest thing coming up right now is the election. And right now, every single poll that you see is a sample statistic. Every single poll that comes out is a sample statistic. The population parameter is what will happen after the vote. So just be on the lookout for that. The other way of saying it is a natural variation between parameter and statistic. a natural variation between parameter and statistic. There's going to be natural variation. There's going to be natural variability. We call it sampling error, but it is not actually a mistake. It's not. It's just natural variability. Love it. All right, let's talk about some of the issues that people can have. Voluntary response bias. Okay, there's an announcement that goes out throughout all of Barnegat. Hey, Barnegat, we want to do a Barnegat town-wide fitness test. We want to see how physically fit people are in the township of Barnegat. We have this whole thing set up where you can come out and knock out this quick assessment of your physical capabilities, and then we'll get everybody and we'll be able to find out exactly how physically fit Barnegat is. Do you really think I'm going to show up for that? You are mistaken. Who's going to show up for that? Physically active people. And you said athletes. Yeah, pretty much. Doesn't matter what age, but physically active people. So the results come in. Barnegat's really fit. I beg to differ. Voluntary response is very tricky because you're dealing with human beings. If you give human beings the option of doing something versus doing nothing, you think about what they're going to choose more often than not. Voluntary response. Individuals are invited to respond. Those who do are counted. In chapter 11 in the textbook, did they tell you the story of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and in that magazine? I think, yeah. I can't remember the name of the guy now. The guy he was facing in the election. Whatever his name was. Again, it doesn't matter. It's lost to history. That's a great example of voluntary response. Hey, guys, write in. It's also a great example of undercoverage, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But that's just a prime example of like bias creeping in. Number one, you're asking people to write in if they want to. And then number two, you're only really reaching the population who actually read that particular magazine. Did you hear about the poll of parents and whether or not they'd have kids again? There have been like very famous polls, and this has been conducted over and over again in like various times. And it's always kind of the same. So like back in like the 80s and 90s, they in the newspaper, people would like write in to like advice columns and junk like that. And one time the person doing the advice column put out the question, hey, write in and answer this question. If you could do it over again, would you have kids? Think about that. 80% of the people said, yes, I would do it over again and not have kids. Yes, do it all over again. No kids. 80% of the people. But it was voluntary response. That didn't accurately represent the population. That only accurately represented the people who wanted to write in to answer the question. And the people who were miserable, the people who, yeah, oh my gosh, my kids are terrible. Those are the people that mainly wrote in. It's really sad, really. I don't know. Oh, I almost tripped and died. Let's see what we got here. Let's talk about convenience. Do you guys know what a Sheetz is? Yes, thank you. Sheetz is like Wawa minor leagues, because they're terrible. There's this whole debate online about Sheetz versus Wawa. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I'm just talking about convenience. Convenience bias. The one cool thing that Sheetz did that Wawa took was they put overhang coverings over their gas station pumps. Wawa stole that. Anyway. Those in the sample are convenient for us to sample. they are convenient for us to oh, excuse me, for us to sample. So for example, I am going to poll everyone on my bus. It's a random selection. I'm going to poll everyone on my bus. Okay, but yeah, that's a bit convenient for you. I mean, yeah, you could poll everyone on your bus. That is a random selection, but that is a bit convenient for you. Your results may be called into question based on the fact that you just conveniently picked everybody that was within proximity of you. When it comes to polling, we have to eliminate as much bias as possible. Now, again, it may not be entirely possible. We may have to account for it and we may have to talk about it. But that's why we never make definitive statements. We never make definitive statements because there may always be something lurking underneath. There is such a thing as undercoverage. Undercoverage, some portion of the population, and I'm going to abbreviate population, is not sampled at all or has smaller representation. You can go back to that magazine example in the textbook in chapter 11, where that magazine had a very conservative reader base. Langdon, that was his name. Alfred Langdon, was that it? Okay, no one cares. All right. That magazine in the textbook talked about the fact that it was a very conservative reader base, and the people who wrote in saying who they were going to vote for president voted for that other guy, and then the reality of the situation was Roosevelt won. There was a portion of the population that was not sampled. When people call you for a poll, when people call you to get a sample or polling you in terms of who you're going to vote for president, do you know what time they typically call you? What time of day do you think is the most convenient to call? I'm sorry, not convenient. What time of day do you think would be the best to call to get a better representation of the public? Huh? Dinner time. Unfortunately, dinner time. You can't call in the middle of the day. People are at work. Can't call late at night. The only people up are playing, like Call of Duty or some junk like that. And they're not going to answer the phone. You have to call at dinner time, unfortunately. And then people get mad. Why are you calling me at dinner time? Well, we really need to know who's going to win. Then I've talked about non-response. Non-response, talked about that a lot about Wisconsin. Those who don't respond have differing answers to those that do. Those who don't respond have differing answers to those who do. It happens. It happens a lot. And the way that we kind of go about fighting non-response bias is you have to create an atmosphere in which the people who don't respond or do respond, what are they not responding for? Now, you think about it. The people who did not respond in Wisconsin were not responding because they didn't trust the pollsters. They had a very, contentious opinion about those who collected polls, a very contentious opinion about the media that was going to present the poll data. So it wasn't on the pollster. It was on that relationship between, people who report data and people who give data, I guess, or something like that. Unfortunately, couldn't really get around at that time. I wonder if it's going to be the same time this thing around. I don't know. It's going to be a fun mathematical night for me. By the way, I wasn't lying. I am going to be live streaming on the election night. You guys have that week off, right? In November? Yeah. I'm going to be live streaming for multiple hours. It's going to be great. You should join in. Yeah, my personal one. Now, again, I'm not going to be showing the TV. I'm going to be showing my America map that I'm going to be filling in with markers. I am not going to be giving any form of political opinion in terms of issues. I am mainly going to be, here's the mathematics behind it. Here's what's happening currently right now. Here's what I believe will happen in the next hour, things like that. Here's maybe when I can call the election before the TV channels, you know? Response bias is not the opposite of non-response. Response bias is actually quite different. Anything in survey design that influences the responses. Anything in the survey design that influences the responses. For example, yes or no? Would you agree to raising the speed limit on the parkway to 75 miles an hour? So I go to the next person in the next class. Completely different person. They've never heard that first question. Agree or disagree, would you like to raise the speed limit on the parkway even though it would increase the chances of crashes and people dying? Now you're not so quick. That's response bias. Response bias is anything in the survey design that influences the responses. Anything that could potentially influence a certain response that maybe I want consciously or subconsciously. Because the way that I worded that pushed you in a certain direction. Whereas the way that I worded that originally just gave you free rein to answer the way that you felt. That's response bias. You have to eliminate that junk. Oh, but no, Mr. Markey, I just needed to inform them that this could happen. Okay, yeah, but you're clearly pushing them in a certain direction. And when you do that, that is response bias. Your job is to eliminate all bias. Now, there are a couple things, obviously I said, on Google Classroom for you. There is a quizzes, just kind of reviewing a lot of this note information. There is a AP test free response question that I want you to be able to knock out. I am going to be, after Tuesday, assigning other things to you, of course. It's going to be weird moving forward because we do have to move at a slightly elevated pace now that the school year has gotten moving, especially with AP Stat. But yeah, we'll get there. Friday, I'll be online Friday. I'll post, well, the links are technically already there, but I'll be on Friday, and we'll get this thing moving. Anyway, those in the live stream, I apologize for the principal peeking his head in. I don't know if he'll ever do that again, but we'll see what happens. All right, bye.